be taking notes, and it's going to be at the bottom of this agenda. So yeah, all right, we are live. Thank you all for being here. Thank you everyone who is tuning in. This is our fourth chat of the Pride Education series with the Center on Colfax. We have 2 people from the center today with us, super exciting, and we'll get there. But yeah, so let me just start with Fireside. So Fireside was started just to bring people together at the beginning of quarantine and the pandemic, and just bring people together online for a reason, stimulating, cathartic, and social. And yeah, so, you know, this, I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Kai Walsh. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm trans, non-binary. And yeah, my why, you know, the reason I started creating these queer chats was just, I lack community in my own, you know, I'm in Denver, and it's just been really hard to find other people who are, you know, similar to me, who have the same values. And I just think this has been a really awesome time to meet other people and, you know, hear what everyone has to say. So with that, I'll introduce Johnny. Go ahead.
Hey there, everybody. My name's Johnny Humphrey. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the Director of Inclusivity Services at the Center on Colfax. We're excited to be co-hosting this series. I never really talk about the center when we do this. So we were founded in 1976, and we are one of the oldest centers, the oldest and the largest in the Rocky Mountain region. And we have lots of exciting programs and services. I invite you to check our website out, which is lgbtqcolorado.org. And I'm very excited to have one of my colleagues on this panel today as well. So that's John White. We'll get the center. We'll get all the folks from the center.
Sure, let's do it. Hi, everybody. I'm John White, and I am the events director for the Center on Colfax. Really excited to be here joining everybody, and so grateful for this partnership with Kai and the team at Fireside at 5. I know that they've been very successful thus far, and looking forward to conversations that we're going to have tonight.
How about Amelia?
Hey everybody, my name is Amelia Caramadre. I am coming to you from Providence and Boston sometimes. I'm a JD MPH student, so I'm studying law and public health. And I've had a great privilege to be involved in many different intersects of law and public health, and a proud ally of all my queer friends, and happy to learn and grow here today.
Thank you for being here. Hi, Kamiya. How are you?
So good. How are you?
Good. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I doing an introduction now?
Mm-hmm.
It's on me.
Please, please.
Hello.
Spotlight's on you, honey.
I'm Kamiya. My pronouns are she, her. I am the co-founder of SoulNia. We actually just did a pop-up to benefit the Center on Colfax.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're coordinating with Joe right now. SoulNia is a vegetarian soul food catering and pop-up company. I'm just excited to be here and see all of your beautiful faces. Thank you for having me.
Yay.
We're so happy to have you. Hi, Kina. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Happy to be here. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm one of the San Francisco leads with Out at WTW, which is Willis Towers Watson. And just so happy to hear what other folks experience and what they have to say and soak it all up. So thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you, and we're very happy to have Ryan as well. So welcome, Ryan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Smith. I also am non-binary, so I go by they, them as well. I'm a student with Amelia at Northeastern University School of Law, and I'm primarily focused on technology as well as health law. And I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to say on workplace LGBTQ inclusion and diversity today. So thank you.
Thank you. We're happy to have you and excited for this conversation today. This particular topic, all of them have been really important to me, but this one really is closest to the work that I do at the center, working with companies, nonprofit, and government agencies. So DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, are near and dear to my heart, and I know they are to everyone on the panel. So I'm really excited about this topic in particular. So let's just dive right in. Just going to throw a question out and we'll see who wants to answer first. But how do you personally feel the culture is changing as it relates to the LGBTQ community? And let's think about, maybe start from an employee, perhaps, maybe that perspective or that lens, or maybe just even your personal life. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you feel the LGBTQ culture is being embraced so far in your own experience.
I would love to speak first on that.
Please.
So as a Black queer woman, when I first came out, I came out when I was 12, told my parents around that time, and really wanting to identify with the queer people around me and not really being able to. We had shows like South of Nowhere and Degrassi and all of these shows that I watched growing up that didn't have any people that looked like me. And so now I'm seeing a lot more people, especially when you get out of kind of this media related LGBTQI identity, you start to see people that look like you. And there's more acceptance from when I first started dating and started getting a lot of hate about the way that I looked. It's not as prevalent anymore. I'm starting to find a lot more acceptance and community and true community and the LGBTQI community that I have been looking for. And in terms of employment, I was in the military, and how that whole landscape changed when, because we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell, how when gay marriage was legalized across the nation in 2015, people crying about it. And then there had to be policy change for us to actually talk to our LGBTQIA, coworkers, and like, what does that actually look like for people who were like, I'm not serving with this person, and now you have to serve with this person, and now this person can't get married alongside you. So like that, I feel like everything has been changing in terms of identity and in terms of how we talk about things, and now it's being implemented in our work as well.
Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
I guess I'll jump in next, but I think that was really meaningful what you had to say. And I think, especially in the same theme of transparency and openness, I think especially our generation has been a lot more fortunate in that we haven't necessarily, at least in the spaces that I've been in, from the places of privilege that I am in higher education and in those areas, I feel like it's definitely been more open and accepting to kind of listen to queer voices and minority voices, and especially at Northeastern University School of Law, it's very accepting of the queer community and very liberal. And so I feel like when you put yourself in those spaces, you're able to kind of sometimes have more constructive conversations and discuss these issues without feeling uncomfortable about them. And at least for me, I know coming to terms with my identity and just my sexuality and everything in that sphere, I definitely struggled with my confidence and my voice. And I think especially in the workplace and being able to, I worked in the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts in their healthcare division, and there was everyone kind of just talked candidly about their personal lives, about their partners, and there was a couple of LGBTQ people who also were comfortable speaking about those topics, and it made me feel a lot more at ease and comfortable that I can say my piece and speak my truth and not have to kind of second guess myself and really filter myself in those spaces where I was comfortable. Obviously, you need to make sure you're in a safe place and somewhere where people might not attack you or retaliate against you in certain ways, but a lot of times it's hard to know that. And I think especially in the legal profession, it's very predominantly heterosexual white men, I would say. And so sometimes when you are in those spaces, it can feel a little bit uncomfortable to say what you have to say, but at least for me, I felt more comfortable when you know you have allies in those spaces and when your organization and team kind of supports you and knows you to a greater extent, which I've been fortunate to have those experiences, I would say.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
I'll chime in with back in my day. No. No, it's really interesting to see how far we have come as a society within the workplace, because I remember, you know, I have been in theater and acting my entire life. And so when I switched gears and went into the corporate world, it's like, oh, I have to change completely who I am, because, you know, no one's going to hire me because I am too flamboyant, or because I have nail polish on, or because I have earrings, you know. So it's like I found myself always figuring those things out before going in for a job interview. And that's back when everything was in person. You know, this was before online filling out of even applications. So it's interesting, my previous company before coming to the Center on Colfax, I was one of the very first queer people that they ever had in the organization of 250 employees. So, you know, and I come in like a box of chocolates. I am shiny and new, and I am, you know, proud of who I am. And so I'm like, take me in, that's what I'm here for. So it was always interesting having conversations with people that weren't that comfortable around, or just simply that they've not been exposed to it. You know, there's just that whole piece of the puzzle as well, is that you have so many people in the workforce that have never worked with someone that identifies as part of the LGBTQIA community. And then obviously on top of all of that, it comes into all the things at work of, you know, what's PC to say. And, you know, coming from my previous world of entertainment where kind of anything goes backstage, to now being in a corporate environment, I'm like, ooh, I probably shouldn't say that out loud. But it's also trying to educate people, because they would come to me and be like, you know, just during a lunch, so when did you know you were gay? And usually if I didn't really know the person that much, I'd be like, I'm gay? You think I'm gay? Just to kind of be as an icebreaker. And now I probably wouldn't do that, because people would probably just take it to the, you know, the extension of, oh my gosh, you're singling me out for, you know, calling you out, or whatever it might be. And so, you know, it's just a different time. And even that was only 10 years ago, you know, just how much we've come, that now, like in my time frame, we never grew up with GSAs in school. It was like, I didn't know any people like myself in my small town. And now kids have that luxury of growing up with that, which is fabulous. And I love how that we keep evolving as a society. And yes, as we sometimes take 3 steps backwards, we have to think about the positive side of it and think about the 10 steps forward that we've already taken. And yes, maybe those 3 steps behind are a little bit of ding and they hurt really a lot, but let's focus on the positive so we can keep moving forward, rather than feeding into the narrative that the rest of society wants us as queer people to, you know, suppress our feelings or suppress our activism. Like, that's not why we're here. And, you know, for me, activism is a big part of that, in education of the people in the workplace that maybe don't know they're an ally, but we can make them an ally.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a really good point, John. And, you know, like you were just saying, you know, just getting more people involved. I always have this, you know, ever since, I guess it's been like 5 or so years. I mean, I've lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for almost 18 years, and I just moved to the middle of Oregon, but I've lived in Oakland for the past decade. And, you know, that's certainly a hot spot for anything, whether Berkeley, Oakland, you know, Black Panthers, Black Lives Matter. And I know we're going to talk about intersectionality in a little bit, but, you know, this particular Pride, especially because of, you know, all the racial injustice and police brutality that is at the forefront right now, finally, you know, it's really made me examine what the first Pride was. You know, I remember back in the day, just, you know, not really being interested in what the first Pride was, like, what is this history stuff? But, you know, as a parent now, and just being able to move forward, like, we have to know what our history is. And especially right now, you know, at Willis Towers Watson, at least from Northern California, we really took a step back and we're like, look, you know, we are going to be focusing on Black and Brown trans lives this Pride, because, you know, if it weren't for, you know, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, like, of course, there were so many other important people involved in catapulting, queer liberation. But those two people had a major part to play.
Yeah.
And it's just so ironic that, these two people were so paramount in launching queer liberation. And even today in 2002, we are still seeing Black trans women who, are just getting the brunt of either hatred or violence or worse. So I think, all that to say, I think people are starting to learn about empathy and compassion and see what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. I mentioned as a parent, like I'm doing all that I can to, let my 6-year-old and my 1-year-old know, like, what is privilege? Like your parents, your parent might be queer and brown, which, obviously has been a product of different forms of discrimination, but that doesn't mean that I don't have privilege. And that also doesn't mean that I can't leverage that privilege to make other folks aware of, what people experience on a daily basis. So that's kind of the angle where I've been coming from, but just kind of like relearning pride and relearning what it means to be an ally for the Black and African American communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm glad you brought that up because, what we did see, and, it's corroborated with what you just said is, people, this pride, we've really seen this crossroads of injustices and, people really woke up to that. And with not being able to celebrate pride the way we normally celebrate. And just going back to, what Ryan said about trustworthiness and transparency and also corporate responsibility and making sure that, you're not just slapping, Black Lives Matter on, your window and saying, yep, that's good enough, or slapping, a flag on and a pride flag and being like, look at this, this is, we love gay people, it's like, what are you actually doing that's furthering equality and equity, most importantly? Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Amelia, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Please.
And just comment how fortunate I've been since I've started in my career to always have opportunities where I've worked beside and worked for very confident and powerful queer people. And it's been really great for me because I've had such examples and leaders in these people to help me understand what they've gone through. But it's also made me take for granted the struggle and the exclusion that they've probably faced because I've seen them at a place where they have overcome that, at least facially, in my position. So I've always wanted to learn more about how they got there, specifically with the identity that they have. But I've been empowered to know the potential that happens when we remove the exclusive terms and discriminatory factors in our communities, in our institutions. And I've been studying public health in undergrad. I had many queer professors, and it wasn't necessarily, it was very normal, obviously. And we got to learn from their perspective, and learning public health from people, queer public healthers who are ingraining how crazy the HIV epidemic was and how it's still happening and it's not forgotten, and learning from professionals who have started queer specific clinics for children who are still seeing high rates of HIV, and learning about these things that aren't that talked about in other institutions. I feel extremely privileged to have that experience and to have grown up with that and be able to bring that mindset with me and share it with other people.
Yeah, I think our history is something that we're finally able to share in spaces. I know we at the center through our youth program, and we had an installation for the 50th anniversary of Stonewall last year, and then we were able to share that with schools, and we were able to have we had tours where and a curriculum for students to be able to have access to the information. But growing up, we never knew nothing about Stonewall, knew nothing about queer people, felt very isolated growing up in a really small community in Kansas at the time, and felt like I was the only person, and then was demonized for being that person. I think it is so important, these GSAs that we see in schools, and getting funding and in companies and different spaces. But I think our history is so critically important, and being authentic about it and not whitewashing it. I mean, I think as a society, we tend to whitewash so many aspects of our history, and make it sound much better than it actually is, about this different strives and the inequalities that we have still around race, still around, sex. And, the newest front, that I see is our trans siblings and gender diverse siblings that I think in a lot of spaces people seem to think that they get, gay, lesbian, or bisexual siblings are still struggling with recognition inside and out of the community. So I think we definitely as a society have so much work now around trans, gender diverse communities, and certainly our bi and pansexual communities. I would be really interested to hear from our panelists about how your identities, particularly being gender diverse, being gender non-binary, and how your companies or your circles of influence that you're in, how they're embracing, hopefully, your identity, or challenges or successes that you've had.
Yeah, I can start. So I actually recently came out as non-binary only like a year ago. So I had always identified as someone who was gay growing up. I went to Mount Holyoke, which is an all-women's college. And, unfortunately, a few years back, I went through cancer. And after that, I was like, I'm not going to wait anymore to feel my full self. And so it actually turned out that like the week that my daughter was starting kindergarten, like I just happened to get this phone call saying, hey, we have this opening for top surgery if you're ready. And I was like, sure. And meanwhile, my partner was also like 8 months pregnant with our son. But it was like, all right, let's just jump through it. Let's do it. So this is, it's been a very newish thing for me, as being non-binary. And I think even before, well, officially our organization around Pride last year asked folks to add their pronouns to their signatures. And this was something that I was already doing, regardless of whether it was official or not. So, as being non-binary, it was definitely hard. It's still hard having folks, refer to you as your proper pronoun. I've had to I've had to call a client out for introducing me as she, even though she asked for a bio and I gave it to her, and she took it upon herself to change my pronoun. And yeah, so I called her out very politely and asked her to use my proper pronoun. I was doing a couple trainings for that particular organization, but I think as far as me, I hear it every day when I'm talking to clients, when I'm working with colleagues, referring to me as she. And I think a lot of that, again, goes back to history, where I have been with the organization since like 2004, right? So people remember me as being this kid who had long hair and pearl earrings and wore my Boston Red Sox hat everywhere. And we evolve, and even after top surgery, at first I was like, I kind of felt really quiet. Like I felt like I lost my voice when I was out in the world, because before people on the streets would just see me as like this lesbian, even though I've never identified as a lesbian. But now they're like, what's going on over there? What is that person? And so I remember after getting top surgery, just really actually kind of being afraid to use my voice. And that was not, that was like the complete opposite of what I was expecting. So as far as, you know, in our San Francisco office, like I said, I'm no longer there, but I'm still working on trying to get a bathroom, a single stall restroom. And it, you know, it doesn't need to say anything on it. I think sometimes that people get hung up on that, and it's like,
Right.
just have it say restroom and anyone can use it. But, you know, as a bonus, people who do identify as non-binary or trans or whatever, anyone can use it. So that's something that I'm still pursuing. And I've been really fortunate to have a few great mentors at Willis Towers Watson, and also phenomenal straight allies. So, you know, the thing that keeps coming up for me is, you know, and why I'm doing this, it's that I'm doing it for the people the kids who are coming up behind us. You know, I feel like gender is seems to be so much more fluid now. You know, at first I think of it as on a spectrum. Now it's just like which way, whatever. And what do we have as an organization to offer people this? To offer to people who, you know, identify in whatever way that they do. So again, you know, in the same way that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, you know, they did this for themselves and for the future. And that's kind of what I keep coming back to as why I do what I do.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just piggybacking off of that a little bit, you know, everyone has their own, you know, every queer person has their own coming out story. And, you know, I surprisingly had two. You know, I came out as queer. I was like, I'm such a lesbian, it hurts. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh shoot, I'm not done yet. I'm actually non-binary. I'm going by they, them pronouns. And, you know, the only reason that I ever found out who I was, right, who I really was, which is me right now. You know, I have been the most me in the last year. You know, it's about the same the last year than I've ever been in my entire life, you know? And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been working at an agency called Joy Lab with Jade Baranski, my old boss, who is non-binary and goes by they, them pronouns. And one day, literally it's a few months into working there, and they asked me, hey, by the way, you know, what pronouns do you go by? And I was like, they, them, you know, and I didn't even think about it. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll try it. And they enforced it in the office, and I got to actually see, before bringing it to my social circle, like I got to see people enforcing my pronoun and saying, hey, actually, no, they go by they, them. And, you know, seeing that and having that allyship in, you know, in a workplace, like I could have never asked for anything more, you know? And, you know, after that, I went out on my own and I started my own digital marketing agency. And so I work for myself, and, you know, I'm my own boss. So I don't have to worry about my workplace environment because, you know, here it is. And, you know, I'm the one who creates it. And I get to pick and choose who I work with. And if they don't respect me, I don't work with them, you know? And I think that's been really powerful, but it's also a privilege. It's such a privilege, you know? And I think if I can at least, you know, be my full self and admit to everyone and say, not even admit, like I will willingly talk about it, you know? I took testosterone for 3 months, and, you know, that same fear of changing yourself and, oh gosh, like what was I thinking? You know, I took testosterone the day I had my doctor's appointment, and I left crying. I was like, what did I do? but I loved it. And I knew it was right for me, but it was hard to get over the social stigma that I've grown up knowing, you know? And I know that, you know, Ryan, you probably have something else to say to this too, definitely. But, you know, it's not easy. It's not something that you choose, you know, and that goes for the same as the color of your skin. It's not, you know, we have a privilege to be ourselves and out and queer, right? But, you know, many people of color, well, people of color do not have the privilege to choose to be out and out loud about it. And I don't know, I think just recognizing that this intersection of queer identities is, you know, it's so rich, it's so far and wide, and there are so many intersecting identities with queer identities that, you know, we can't think of one problem as like their problem. Every problem is actually our problem too. And whether we are an ally, whether we are up there fighting, you know, we have to be doing something. You know, yeah, my little rant.
No, that's honestly, hearing both of your stories is really inspiring to me, especially hearing how much progress you've made, Kina and Kai. I know you've made so much progress, both of you, in the last year. And I think for me personally, I am definitely still on my journey of gender and where I identify within that. And I think actually it wasn't until I got to law school that people actively used pronouns and introduced themselves with their pronouns. And today I completely forgot to add mine to my name. So that was a mistake on my part. Because even for me, it is something to get used to, because I grew up in a very rural town, and then I ended up going to an engineering college, which was also pretty conservative. So I found my place and my friends, but I think in terms of just the culture, it wasn't the most open and supportive of people's genders and just having these types of discussions. So it really wasn't until the last couple of years that I was able to kind of be immersed in communities that were more diverse and having these discussions. And I had a lot of power on kind of changing my own perspective and realizing, hey, it was similar to kind of like you were saying, Kai, where I felt like I was one gender for a while because I really hadn't thought about it that much. But then when an opportunity presented itself where everyone was introducing themselves with pronouns, which I've never experienced before, I was like, you know, I know that I'm on my gender journey and I don't identify as male. And so I am going to identify as non-binary, and I introduced myself as that. And everyone supported me in that wholly and completely. And it was a really great experience in that extent. But I think on the flip side of that, in the workplace, and even with my own comfort level of my own gender identity and my own strength in enforcing that, I think since I really didn't know 100% where I was at on that journey, I still present as he, him, since physically I look that way. And I think it is easier for people when they see me to kind of just label me as that, as a very gay guy, which I can understand. And I think since I'm at a place in my career where I haven't been working for multiple years, I've been in the educational context and I have been in internships. So it really isn't that opportunity to maybe grow your relationships in that context and to kind of just be who you are right off the bat. At least for me, I never felt the most comfortable with that, and I still struggle with that, I would say. So I think that's something, it's really inspiring to hear both of your stories in terms of enforcing your identity and really advocating for yourself, because I know that is something I've definitely struggled with in the past, is knowing when it's okay to speak up and safe, but also just to defend myself if I feel uncomfortable in how someone's referring to me or just anything in that sphere. So there's a lot of power in that. And I think I'm really trying to hone my voice and know that you can say what you need to say and speak your truth, even if you don't feel comfortable doing that, because it helps you. And it also helps, like you were saying, Kina, everyone who comes behind you and the person who hears you speak and identify and represent for your community. It makes them feel more comfortable. And I know for me, like I was mentioning before, in my workplace experiences, there hasn't necessarily been the most representation of non-binary or trans people. And it's definitely lacking in colored and minority voices, I would say, especially in the legal profession. But the people who were able to kind of speak about their identities and be candid about their discomfort with fitting in some of these circles and being in some of these different classes of people, it really inspired me to know it's okay to say what I need to say and to kind of live in my truth in that moment. And so it's really powerful hearing your stories, and I'm excited to kind of continue on my journey to hone that strength, I would say.
That's amazing. John, you want to add anything?
Sure. For me, it's wonderful to be included in this conversation because obviously I started in my workplace journey long before there was anything beyond the LGBT portion of, the alphabet. And so for me, it's interesting because it's a learning curve for everybody and I'll speak for my generation. I always want to be respectful of people. And a lot of times I have caught myself using the wrong pronoun when people are going by they, them. But it's nice because people are politely correcting me. It's not a thing. And I think a lot of people that are outside of the queer realm feel like you're being, chastised for using someone's wrong pronoun. But they have to understand that it's okay. It's a learning process for everybody. We've had ingrained in our brains through television and media and movies for all of these years that it's male, female. There's really nothing else that exists in that world. So we don't have any examples to lead by. And so that's why it's really important for us to start having those positive influencers throughout the world that are putting that into people's kind of front of mind. And so they can think about it and they can stop and say, oh, well, maybe I should just know what their name is and call them by their name. We find that we're always having to use labels for people and how we kind of function in society. But in the workplace, like for me, I'm like, I would rather get to know your name rather than say, hey, you, or here she comes, or here he comes, or here they come. So rather than get hung up on the title of people's identity, that's everyone's own personal journey. And we need to be respectful of that and learn what their proper pronouns are. But at the same time, we need to just kind of embrace our own human culture of, learning someone's name and using that name when you address them. So I think that's a different thing. I've worked with people in the workforce and, even within my own family, it's like, well, I thought queer was a bad thing. I thought that was a bad word, and at one time it was, and so as we evolve as human beings and in society, like we see this every single day. There are things that were, maybe seen as slanderous or, awful terminology towards people. Now there are younger people embracing this because it's encompassing of everybody. Using the word queer is no longer derogatory. It just encompasses everybody rather than always having to do LGBTQIA+, because some people are not comfortable with that because they're afraid they're going to forget a letter or they're going to leave somebody out. And, when you have empathetic people in the world, in the workplace, you also hope that they're also empathetic and so that they don't want to feel bad themselves, but they also don't want to cause harm to other people that just by referring to them by a wrong pronoun. So that's one thing that I've seen a lot in the workplace is, and I've had people come to me of my age or even older and say, well, I don't know. And I'm like, do you know what their name is? Like use the person's name. It's really not that hard. So I find that just the more we talk about it and the more that we have people talking about it and younger folks coming up in the world and they're creating their own circle of people that they're looked up to. So now you all are creating your tribe of people that are looking up to you and what you're doing and putting into the world. And so that's what each generation is supposed to do. I fought for certain rights and things in my generation and continue to do that for the generation coming up. It doesn't stop just because I've reached a certain age. I joke all the time about my age. I mean, I'm really not that old, but it's one of those things of, I'm like, oh, we'll leave it to the young people. I'm like, no, that's not the right mentality to have. Like, we need to stand up because we had to fight. And so it's our turn to show the proper way and a respectful way also to do that, to where your voice is heard and change can happen.
Absolutely.
Can I add a small tidbit?
Yes, please.
I am not gender non-binary, nor am I trans, so I don't feel like my voice is very large in this conversation, and I don't like to take up too much space, but I did want to say I grew up saying yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. My great-grandmother is from Virginia, and she had to tell me one time, that, it's yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. So going into the military, that's also ingrained into you as well. And I didn't really kind of start learning about gender non-binary folks until I moved to Oakland, and being in that community of all of these people who express themselves differently, and also were like, hey, that's on my pronouns. And I'm like, oh, cool, that's what's up. And then being able to take that back to people that I was serving with. I can specifically think of Salvetti, older Italian guy who was like, man, I don't understand that ish. And I was like, well, you just gotta respect people. It's just like somebody calling you sir. It's like, respect that somebody, like, that's what you want to be called, and respect that that's what they want to be called.
Real quick, I'm always fascinated when people say, I don't use pronouns, and they use them all the time. And so it's like someone said, what's this pronoun thing? I don't even use them. What's he doing over there? And like, you just use a pronoun. Like, I mean, you may be removed from school and you forget what a pronoun is, but we all use them. But definitely names, if you don't know someone, as I'm teaching, training and doing things, inviting people to share their pronouns. If you don't feel comfortable, you shouldn't have to, but, use someone's name until you know for sure. And yeah, but it's in the one quick last thing is bathrooms that people are like, gender neutral bathrooms. I'm like, yeah, you have one at home, don't you? Oh yeah. I mean, people are so phenomenally like, they forget everything sometimes when they start to have these conversations. Maybe they're nervous, maybe they just are not used to it, but these are all common things if you really think about it. And just because something doesn't apply to you doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So let's move along. So we've got all sorts of fun things to talk about. Intersectionality, I think this is a great lead in. And the fact, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different ways to approach this topic. So I obviously think we all possess many different identities, and it's so incredibly important to think about those. But then, so I'd love for you to share that about your own journey through intersectionality and coming to terms with different aspects about your own identities. But then secondly, maybe exploring how you're seeing that orchestrated into policies within your organization. Is it being successfully implemented? What are some things that are working, aren't working? And maybe we can talk about ways to impact that. So who wants to start? Bueller?
I'll start.
Thanks.
So I already mentioned that as growing up, I didn't feel like there was a ton of intersectionality, and that just is in terms of the color of my skin. And now that I'm seeing more of that in the LGBTQIA community, it's like people of color are being accepted more, trans people of color are being accepted more, and trans people in general, bisexual people get a lot of hate in the LGBT community. So it's been a journey for me in terms of how I relate to the people in this community, just because I don't always feel like I've always had a home. And like I said, moving to Oakland and going to Oakland Pride as opposed to SF Pride, which is not as diverse. Oakland Pride made me feel like I had a home with the people who were there. And so within our organization, it's just my wife and I in this business, but also working with organizations that are specifically trying to help the youth in the LGBTQIA community, like the Center on Colfax, and that have like different sections of their organization that helps trans youth or, like trans youth of color. And it's like, how are you able to implement that within your own organization if you don't see it in other organizations? How are you able to make sure that your partnerships are conducive to your environment, to what you actually want, and to what you say that you're doing, if you don't see it within other organizations? And I feel like that's something that Tess and I are doing really well. Tess is my wife. She's incredible, by the way. Awesome person. That's
a little
it.
plug for your wife. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Good.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
I'll add a little bit here. I think just to kind of go off what was just said too, is it's interesting that it comes back to just people need an example to lead by. So, there are a lot of organizations that are run by well, most of them, I would say the majority of major corporations are run by cis white men. And so you know, how do we get in front of them to be diverse? It's, you know, for me, it's about hiring people like Johnny that have, you know, you have a diversity and inclusion manager that comes into your organization, and, you know, they're on staff to help you, guide you in that right direction to be inclusive for all people. And so I think, but we don't have enough examples of that. And that's the biggest problem, is that there's nobody out there, you know, waving a flag saying, you know, great, we're 100% on the HRC, you know, scale of to come work for us. You know, they leave it up to individuals to go and research that. But for me, if I were a person just starting out in the job field, like, why wouldn't you put that bright, shiny thing on your website, on your job board, saying that you are accredited with 100% with HRC? And then I would go be like, oh, what's HRC? Let me go figure out what that is. And, you know, it's those types of things. There's nobody that's leading by example to be that front runner of saying, hey, this is how you do it. And we're going to create kind of a template, or to give you examples of how our best practices are. And then you all can take this as organizations and use it.
I completely, sorry.
No, please, Ryan.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with what you're saying, John, with representation, because I know for myself, especially coming to terms of my identity and everything, it really has been difficult to find people that I can relate to in the workplace, or just even in LGBTQIA affinity groups like the Boston Bar Association, or just in the workplace. It doesn't seem like there's always even any kind of publicity for these groups in workplaces, or maybe there even isn't one in the first place, which has been my experience in a number of places. But at the same time, it's like when there isn't anyone championing that or having any of these discussions, then it's difficult to find anyone in the workplace that you can talk to or feel camaraderie with on this level. And it can definitely be, I would say, a little bit isolating, and it does put a lot of the onus on everyone individually to find those communities for themselves. So I definitely had to kind of work harder to find those spaces within friendships and external circles, I would say, especially from the workplace, because the representation isn't necessarily there. And I think there's a tremendous amount of power in giving voices to people, and even just having a poster up that there's an affinity group in the workplace, or that there's a training around these issues. I think that shows a lot of support for people, and even having a mandatory training on sexual harassment and anti-discrimination that includes the queer community as well as minorities, and has all this within the discussion that people, not that they have to listen to, but that should be something that is mandatory for people to hear, so that people know that there is support for you and that you have a means to address some of these things and to discuss these issues with a supervisor, even if they aren't necessarily in the exact community or relate to you on some of those issues, that you at least know that you have somewhere to go and that you have someone to talk to who might be able to point you in the right direction, to talk to someone who can empathize more, offer you more emotional and empathetic support than they could offer themselves.
Definitely. Kina, I'd love to hear from you. Yeah, and we'll just start Watson.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think about, I guess my personal mission at Willis Towers Watson is, one, the restroom, an inclusive restroom for everyone. The second piece is, again, getting back to like intersectionality, and kind of what you were just saying, Ryan. So for Pride, we had this a couple global events that we do every year. It's called Rainbow Families, and it's kind of like this, but several folks come together, and basically we tell our stories. So we have a couple questions very similar to this, but currently we are a 40,000 person organization. So sometimes it can feel like you're not connected, and yet by having these Rainbow Families fireside chats, it felt like we were human. And that might sound a little funny, but when when you work for a professional services firm or company, people are paying you for what's coming out of your mouth. So whatever comes out of your mouth better be worth listening to. But these chats were amazing because you got to know these people who were across the world, and you were able to create this space of intimacy, where folks got to talk about their families and themselves and what they experience on a daily basis. So like I said, in addition to the restroom, I'm really trying to get us to have just more storytelling, even if that's just like a quarterly thing. Pull people from all over the place, so that people can know what it's like to, as closely as you can, to walk in someone else's shoes. The other piece that I'd like to really try to do is create a white affinity group within Willis Towers Watson. I think, off the bat, that might sound a little funky, but, especially when it comes to race relations, I don't want to see a panel of Black people having to tell their story over and over and over again. This is, you know what I mean? Like, they may, I don't know, it's people who are not Black are the people who need to be working on this, okay? Because they're the ones with the problem. So as far as like a white affinity group goes, being able to have a safe place where, white people can come together and be vulnerable. Like, I know that there's so many people, whether, whatever topic you choose, they're just afraid. They're afraid to take that first step, but they also need to be doing the homework. They need to be listening to podcasts. Code Switch is one of our favorites in our home. You need to be reading books, and even, I think a lot of people are running to White Fragility. White Fragility is written by a white woman. How about let's go to So You Want to Talk About Race? So really being critical about your intentions. And I've just been going to a lot of webinars lately. Lesbians Who Tech, they just had their Pride Summit, which was phenomenal, being able to listen to global diversity leaders, whether it's at Indeed or JP Morgan, listening to Elisa Garza, having a conversation with Senator Warren. Like, we need to put ourselves out there. We need to sit with being uncomfortable. Because, I thought I was woke. I thought I was down. I lived in Oakland for a decade. Our church is very intergenerational, interracial, which is how we're able to like have these hard conversations in a safe place. But there's just so much more to learn. And I think, John, you had mentioned earlier, it doesn't need to be that hard. Like these, it's very simple things. Call someone by their name. But it's like, it really is dissecting what we take for granted every day. And I think that's kind of where or how we're able to move forward. I recently attended this class online through Colorado State University and their School of Business. And it was, the instructor was Patrice Palmer, who also identifies as they, them. And, we started in the beginning of this class, and it was, the name of the class was Creating Space for Courageous Conversations. So it's very much relevant to our times, and especially what, some folks are trying to do at their organization. But, she was like, see, I just did it right there. I'm they, them, and I just called them she. But again, we're not perfect, and we need to accept that.
Space for grace.
Exactly. But, they started, they drew Hangman, and we were like, all right. And they're like, what game are we going to play? And did the little spaces and da-da-da-da. People started throwing out letters, and they started drawing, a neck and just dissecting that. Like, what? Our kids are playing Hangman in 2020? 5 people, five Black people have been found, hanging from trees. Yeah. And here we are just going with the flow, playing Hangman. That just blew my mind. Because like I said, I thought I was woke. I thought I was down. And then I hear a story like that, and I'm just totally blew my mind. I got off of that class, and I went to my 6-year-old, and I was like, anyone if they're a teacher, I don't care who they are. They ask you to play that game, you tell them no, and you tell them why. So really just being critical, dissecting, sitting with discomfort, and listening, really listening to what people are saying and how they're showing up.
Two things bother me about that. One is the game itself, but then I was also, why is it gendered? Which is both. We shouldn't be playing the game at all, but I was like, it's yet using language. So like person. But no, we don't, the game's bad. Do not, yes, we should stop doing it.
Like an episode of What Would You Do? You know, if you're sitting in a classroom of kids and start playing Hangman, how many of them really know what that is? You know what I mean? And I love that you just said, Kina, about it's time to get uncomfortable. It is time for all white people to be uncomfortable, because it's okay. Like I said before, I've had conversations with many of my Black friends, and it's okay. I might say the wrong thing, but I'm sure going to get corrected. And I'm okay with that, because I need to learn. I need to learn what the struggle is, because I was born into, I have Native American in my family, but other than that, if you wouldn't know that unless I tell you. It's, I'm not walking around with that on my skin. It's not like I can wipe it away or put on sun, it's just all these things. So having the uncomfortable conversations is the key to right now, to get past of everybody right now, jumping kind of all over the place within the Black Lives Matter movement too, as part of a piece of that. It's like, it's time. I thought I was woke too, but I'm not. It's time to get uncomfortable and learn from the people that are going through the struggle.
Yeah, and Kina, what you were saying about, these organizations and, having one for, white people as well. I think something I do want to point out there is, we should definitely be having, queer organizations and, specific different diverse groups, but also inviting and being open to having allies there, and being open to having, white people come in as allies in the, Black and African American groups that are under, a certain corporation. Yeah, so I think that's super important is, allies are key to this transformation, and they have the ability to speak up and speak out and actively change without putting all of that pressure on, the marginalized individual. And and with that said, Amelia, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Kai. I didn't want to take up too much space on this question because I don't have that personal story to share with you all. And I'm really feel fortunate to hear the stories that you're all sharing today, because it helps me learn and grow and be a better advocate. But I do want to mention briefly that in public health, we spend a lot of time talking about intersectionality, and specific to people in the LGBTQI plus community. Queer people face disproportionate amounts of exclusion from young ages. And what that does is set them up to have a much harder life and put them at a disadvantage compared to people who are not facing exclusion from a young age. And we know that that exclusion from a young age leads to increased exposure to diseases, increased exposure to homelessness, to substances, and a disproportionate footprint on the carceral system because of these social determinants of health, which create the prejudice. And we know that makes the success of our queer friends slower and harder, and which is why we're lacking their presence in many of our professional settings. And it's important to try and interrupt that pipeline. I talk about a cradle to prison pipeline often, but cradle to prison, cradle to disease, cradle to substance misuse, all of those pipelines are things that need to be interrupted, and why it's so important that these conversations are being had so we can try and interrupt that for the people who are coming after us and the younger generations.
Well, I think it's so important to speak to parents. I think, and Kina, I'm so happy to hear you're a parent, and maybe others that disclose that they're parents, but I think it's so important that parents understand the impact that they have in their language, in everything that they're doing, the impressions they're making on their children. And I challenge, parents when I'm doing these trainings about corporate stuff to say, we wouldn't have to come out every single time, and it's never just once, if society didn't have all these expectations around, you're going to be born a boy or a girl, that's it, binary, you're going to be heterosexual, you're going to be cisgender, you're going to be all these different aspects. And so just challenging people to stop making assumptions and having expectations, let people be who they are, let children be who they are, let them figure it out, because they know gender at a very, very young age, younger than their sexual orientation. And I think that we will, and we're trying to change all these things in corporations and when you're an adult, and that's as important as ever. But wouldn't it be great if we had strong foundations for children and in school systems so that we support youth? And I think that that's where we will see a quicker evolution of some of these changes in society. Is
for sure
there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've been talking a lot about having mentors and, seeing folks who came before us and what they've gone through, listening to their stories. But I think it's also equally important to take a look at these younger generations, because they are fierce and they're not afraid of anything, right? They're not going to let anyone tell them anything. But, like I said, my daughter's going to second grade and first grade in their middle school, in their elementary school. They had a big bulletin board with a unicorn, and it's all about think outside the box, be who you want to be. They start after school programs introducing themselves with their name and their pronouns, and these are first graders.
Awesome.
So, to them, they're like, what is going on? I mean, my 1-year-old wakes up and the 6-year-old tries to calm him down. I mean, and she's like, whatever pronoun you choose, I will call it for you. And it's just, but having it be, this thing
normalized.
Exactly. You're open to everything. So I think looking at both ways, just another quick story. My 6-year-old is always like, she was like, no fair. And I'm like, who told you it was fair? Life isn't fair. I don't know where you heard that from, but it's not fair, and just try to explain, there's a starting line and people start in front of it, people start on it, and people start behind it. If you are a brown, Black person, you show up to work, you're queer, you show up to work, there's a lot more pressure put on you as that marginalized person to perform. And then, when you have policies or even unofficial policies where folks aren't getting promoted because of the color of their skin, because they're queer, these are all the things that, like you were saying, Johnny, normalizing things. And you don't want to embrace the differences, but also realize we're just people. We're all just people. So yeah, that's all.
Real quick, I just wanted to you made a very poignant point earlier. Just wanted everyone else to have a voice in this about having that white affinity group. And this is my wife, by the way, everyone. It's Tess.
Hi, Tess.
And just inviting white folks to talk about diversity and inclusion. And my friend Beth, who's this awesome woman, she's a white woman, she's like, if we're together, she will correct other people ahead of me. She's like, hey, actually, no, that's not cool. And I think it's important to not just invite Black folks to, speak on topics of diversity or topics on how to change things. It's important to invite white folks too, because they're going to be the cataclysm for change. We need our allies. Everyone needs their allies. So we kind of do need that. And Amelia, has anyone ever told you look like AOC?
Right?
Not heard that.
You've not heard that?
No.
That is so true.
I can definitely, I just looked it up. Sure, yeah. But on that note, I know it's past, it's 6:05 now, and
such a good topic too. I know.
there's so much more to be discussing, but
there's a lot.
Just right off of that last point is, allies. We can't say it enough, but it's not just that. It's, this was said by Thera Marshall last week on the equality and equity chat. And so they were essentially saying, I want you to empower me to have the voice, to have the rhetoric, the communication, the words to be able to protect you and defend you as an ally. And, and that's the hardest part, is a lot of us, it takes being vulnerable with people, which, I personally don't love doing that, but telling people when I feel most vulnerable. I know we talked, Ryan, Amelia, and I earlier this week about being vulnerable with people and sharing, when I'm misgendered, like I panic and I have social anxiety up the wazoo, but I panic, and I will either say something or I just won't. And it will be sitting with me. It's on my mind. You will see it on my face. And if you don't step in as my friend, as my ally, as my family, if you guys can't step in for me, when you know how much, it means to me and how incredible it feels to be called by the right pronoun, and when someone uses it and respects it and, learns, like, my entire family learned how to use they, them pronouns. They learned how to understand queer identities better. They're still learning. They are not there yet. But, they went from this, I have no idea what this population is, to, oh shit, this population's in my family. This is my child now. Uh-oh, I didn't sign up for this. But they learn to accept me and my identity. And then in accepting me, they have to accept my community. We come as a package, and my community comes at the intersection of everyone, So I don't know, with that, I'll let Johnny say a few last words, but.
Oh, Lord, I don't know.
You got anything to say?
I don't think I can follow that, but yeah, I just think there's so much more. This conversation could go on for it needs to continue, and I would invite us to continue having these conversations, challenging our friends and our families. If we're going to be allies, and we need to be allies of each other in the queer community, we need to be allies of each other, for each other, and we need to hold each other accountable. It's not something we should just expect heterosexual white cisgender people to be allies for us. We have to be allies of each other in the community. So I challenge us to be better, hold others accountable, especially using wrong language, jokes, offensive jokes. I mean, we're going to be spending time with family over holidays and things, and by not saying something, we're basically dismissing and saying it's not a problem for us. And so I think we need to learn to find effective ways to stand up for each other. Find resources, and if you're in a corporate setting, see if your company has, and I'm saying this even beyond our panelists, but for the folks that are listening, if your company doesn't have employee resource groups, affinity groups, business resource groups, ask why not and see what can change, because I think that's a powerful tool. It's much more than, the social connectivity is so critically important, but you can be the catalyst for change within your own organizations. And so I think that's really an effective way to make change in your organizations, looking at your policies and procedures and making sure that they're inclusive. We had a major win from the Supreme Court, so that in all 50 states now, we can't discriminate regarding sexual orientation and gender identity, making sure that your policies actually state that and that they're public. Because I know that queer people looking for jobs are looking on websites for companies to see that they have those policies in place, and make sure that your company's walking the talk. And that's not just in the corporate setting, that's in nonprofit, and that's in government agencies as well. We need to make sure that these systems are in place. There's so much more. I'd love to talk for a lot longer. I'd love to visit a lot more, but I'm going to stop there and thank all of our panelists for sharing your time, sharing your personal stories with us, being vulnerable, and I've learned so much from you, and I'm grateful for each and every one of you. So I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, and just to close this off, so the notes are on the meeting agenda that you all have. I strongly urge you guys to connect with each other on LinkedIn. Anyone who's watching, feel free to reach out to any of us. If you have questions about resources, reach out to literally Fireside, the center, Kai at kaiconsulting.co. Literally reach out to anyone, and it takes just reaching out and having that conversation and starting it. So yeah, thank you all again for being here, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. All right,
Thanks
take it easy.
everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.